looking good. Coming up. All right. Welcome back to our other office. Yeah. Okay, I see 3 tabs. Good. Okay, safer handles are good. Hey, let me get a local.
Pure white light streams out from behind Earth. I am engulfed in colorless, radiant light that seems to be emanating out of cold emptiness and traveling through cold nothingness. The light streams over and around me, and a hint of peaceful serenity awakens inside me. Beyond my view of the sparkling ISS, a rocky coastline on an unrecognized continent drifts into view. Sunlight bathing newly awakened snow-capped mountains into the glory of a new day. I imagine there are people down there somewhere, just starting their day, who are also witnesses to this exquisite beauty from a different but no less compelling perspective. I wish we could share notes. The complex immensity of the ISS against the backdrop of our indescribably beautiful Earth 240 miles below thrusts me into a singularity. The entire universe peels away the blanket of danger, the thoughts of upcoming tasks, the feelings of fatigue, the excitement of being in space are all displaced by a singular vision of beauty. The truth that is blatantly apparent from this vantage point is that every living thing on the planet and the planet itself are inexplicably interconnected and interdependent. What's obvious from this vantage point of physical detachment from Earth is that we are not from Earth. We are of Earth. All of us. Every living creature. Hey everyone. That's a good way to start off. We are not from the Earth. We are of the Earth. Every single living creature on the planet. Welcome to episode 2 of the Floating in Darkness live event series. I'm really happy that you're here with us. I'm coming to you live from the campus of the University of Colorado in Boulder. And I'd like to take a moment to recognize a senseless tragedy that happened not less than 2 miles from where I'm standing right now. And my heart goes out to everybody who's affected. My prayer is that their suffering is reduced. And this incident is a perfect example of why this episode is so important. The topic of this episode is so important, which is how can we transmute our martial instincts inward? How can we overcome our divisiveness? We have got to transcend our differences and come together to discuss and solve the problem of gun violence in America. And we need to do that in a conversation that is rational and not tainted by the narrow desires of special interest groups. Now, I don't have to tell anybody that we live in very divisive times. And some of that polarization comes from the very technology that's intended to bring us together. The echo chamber walled boxes that we have been placed in by commercially and politically driven algorithms are putting us on a trajectory that is dangerous and is leading to disaster. It's a trajectory that we need to correct. So I want to begin our conversation about overcoming divisiveness from a perspective of combat. Combat is an interesting perspective. Combat is the ultimate us versus them environment, but it's also an environment that gives us priceless lessons into human nature, into the human experience, into what leads people to do selfless acts, and it is a priceless example of the power of unity. I want to remind everybody, and to do that, I'm going to play a video, and the video is an excerpt from Floating in Darkness. And just to set the stage, it's a scene in the book where It was just after Desert Storm, so I had just come back from my combat tour in Desert Storm. I'm sitting on a porch, having a couple of beers with a good friend who was recently in the story repatriated as a prisoner from being a prisoner of war, and this was part of our discussion. And I want to remind everybody that as you watch the video and throughout the whole episode today, especially when I have my special guest Dan Schilling later, that this is not just a conversation between Dan and I. This is a conversation amongst all of us. So put your comments and questions up, and we'll address them. Especially during the video, is a good time to start thinking about how you could get involved with this conversation. And with that, I want to play this video. Chapter 7, The Top of the Mountain. I then share my homecoming. I describe landing in Newark Airport and seeing my father and other family members at the gate for a brief reunion on my layover destined for South Carolina and reuniting with Carmel. As I recount this, a previously unacknowledged awareness bubbles up from somewhere deep inside me. For the first time, I realize how surreal the return to normalcy has been. For me, I felt simultaneously overcome with joy to be back in the arms of my country and loved ones, while somehow feeling out of place. Part of me wants to be back in the war, back in the action. I don't understand this disconnect. Even though I'm a warrior, I hate war. War is humanity's biggest failure. Why do I miss it? Then, the reason for this disconnect dawns on me. Even though there was a lot to complain about during the war, like stupid Mickey Mouse regulations and senior officers vying for career advancement opportunities, in the big scheme of the entire conflict, those things were outliers that barely rose above the background noise. I felt a belonging in combat unlike any I had ever experienced. I felt a primordial bond. All of us in combat were inextricably dependent on each other for our very lives. We were not only fighting for our country, we were fighting for each other. Returning to the comfort of a civilized life seems mundane and trivial. Even though my reunion with Carmel, the love of my life, has been heaven on earth and a prayer answered, I, on some level, feel generally disoriented. Something is missing. Worse yet, I've noticed things about my country I've never noticed before. In spite of jubilation over winning the war and being on the receiving end of a public desire to do better by the Gulf War vets than the country did for our Vietnam vets, I have noticed in a profound way the deep divisions in America. Tuning into the news and seeing pundits spewing contempt for others simply for having a different opinion is now repugnant to me. I have heard rampant us versus them sound bites coming from all directions. I know that part of what I was fighting for was the freedom we all cherish so dearly, including freedom of speech. But this is different. Having the right to free speech does not mean you have a right to your own facts or your own truth. Having free speech is not a free pass to spew hatred or to abandon civil discourse. Watching the news, I've seen that disproportionate attention is being put on our perceived differences, leading to divisions between rich and poor, black and white, male and female, Democrat and Republican, urban and rural, educated and uneducated. Of course, I acknowledge that people put too much attention on these differences even before the war. But after emerging from the Iraqi conflict, I see division in a new light. In the war, all those perceived differences melted away into insignificance. All that mattered was, are you fighting with us or against us? Are you part of our tribe or the enemy tribe? For us, it wasn't even whether you were American. All you had to be was part of the coalition. Now, back in the civilian world, it seems that most Americans have completely forgotten the bond that we all share as countrymen. It seems we are no longer Americans first. It seems that what is more important than being Americans is our perceived differences. What is missing is the community we shared in combat, the camaraderie of being brothers and sisters in arms, of being part of something bigger and more important than ourselves, of being willing to die for each other simply because we are part of the same community. During the war, it was as if each of us were all part of an overarching super body. Each of the individual soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines of the various nations aligned against Iraq were like neurons of a giant brain. The cerebral cortex of that brain directing the activities of the body was headquarters. Our aircraft, ships, and weapon systems were the muscles of the giant body. We were combined, aligned, and organized into an overarching structure with a mission more important than its parts. In this case, the function of this brain was to punish, destroy, and liberate. Although our national leadership seemed to do much better in this conflict than past conflicts, the analogy breaks down when you introduce Washington. Maybe the politicians are the amygdala, the reptilian brain responsible for fear, anxiety, and aggression. It seems that I've come back to a world with the mantra, every man for himself. A world of corporate and individual corrupt greed. A world ripe with selfish Wall Street con artists trying to find their next sucker. A nation where it seems some politicians care more about themselves or their party than the country. A nation that has forgotten its motto, E pluribus unum, out of many, one. This world is in sharp contrast to the one-for-all mindset of military combat that I just left. Even seeing something as seemingly trivial as someone littering makes my blood boil. But whenever I'm with Carmel and the twins, this post-combat fog lifts. They remind me that I have a mission, that I have others depending on me. I have a purpose. I have a tribe. All right, we're back. Hope you like that video. I think it's pretty pertinent to the times we're in right now. I want to welcome everybody who's joining. Thanks for all the comments and questions that are coming in. Hey, Michael, I will check out your post. Brian, Steve, Penny, Maya, Keith, hey, everybody. I did want to pop up a couple of comments. Oh, that's nice. Thanks, Mike. Here's one from Michael on the we're not from Earth, we're of Earth. And here's one from Brian. Yes, it is long overdue, and we are more than our media-based profile. From Steve, thank you for honoring what's happening and for calling out how technology is being used to pull us apart. And I look forward to learning from you and your special speaker, the special guest. So with that, why don't we talk about our special guest? So my special guest today is Dan Schilling, an amazing guy, and we're going to he's a perfect guy to have this conversation with about how do we transmute our martial instincts inward and how do we overcome our divisiveness. And I will introduce him via this video. Dan Schilling spent more than 30 years in the military, primarily as a combat controller and special tactics officer, though he proudly started his career as an infantry grunt. His numerous combat and clandestine deployments have taken him around the world and include Operation Gothic Serpent, popularly known as Black Hawk Down from the movie and the book bearing the same name, where he is credited with saving the lives of a U.S. Army Ranger and U.S. Navy SEAL Team 6 member while under fire. He later founded and then served as the first commander of 2 special operations squadrons. His military certifications include Halo and Static Line Master Parachutist, Special Forces Combat Diver, and Demolitions Instructor. A purveyor of adrenaline-fueled endeavors, he holds the Guinness World Record for the most base jumps in 24 hours, 201, a feat he conducted to benefit children who have lost a parent in special operations through the Special Operations Warrior Foundation. He is also a professional-rated demonstration skydiver, speedwing pilot, and volunteer ski instructor with Wasatch Adaptive Sports, helping those with disabilities to experience the thrill of downhill skiing. Dan is now a full-time writer His new book, The Power of Awareness, is designed to prevent people from being victims before a crime is committed and will be available at retailers everywhere June 1st. His last book, Alone at Dawn, was a New York Times and Amazon #1 international bestseller. He and his wife, Julie, live in the Wasatch Mountains of Utah, where he can usually be found skiing or flying his Speedwing in the vicinity of Alta Ski Resort. Hey, Dan. How's it going? Hi. Can you hear me? Dan, you're frozen.
I think I've got you, Ron. I'm having a bit of a transmission reception trouble. Can you hear me okay?
I can. You were frozen there for a little bit, but we got you now. How you doing? Can you hear me? Dan, can you hear me?
Yeah, I've got you. You're freezing a little bit as well. It's the benefits of modern technology. If I caught that comment from one of our viewers, so it's how we go about these things in the modern era and during COVID. But if you got me, I think I've got you now.
Yeah. I think we've got you. Folks who are watching, let us know what you're seeing. And because I think either Dan or I are having some connectivity problems. So if we could figure out where that's coming from, we'll be able to fix it. But Dan, thanks for being on this episode. It's as we've discussed, it's a very, very important topic, and you have a really unique perspective to address that topic. And maybe to start out, can you tell us a story of your time in Somalia and what the book that you wrote, Alone at Dawn, and just tell us your story there and hopefully and I'm sure we could draw some really good lessons from that.
So I'm still getting a bit spotty transmission, but I think per our discussion on this, my experiences with combat are similar to yours in that there's a very strong sense of belonging that is profound at the individual level, and then it transcends that and becomes something that's important to everybody that's involved. But I think there's this dichotomy there, that there's a problem that comes with too much tribe identity, because this is where it fosters that us versus them, which I think is central to what you and I would hope to talk about today and bring everybody together on, which is transcending some of that. But my experience, particularly in Somalia, but in other places where I've experienced combat, Somalia in particular is tribal. As a culture, tribe is everything in that country, and it provides the backdrop by which you measure what is important to you. And, it was interesting to see that from the outside. But of course, as soon as we were introduced into the equation, and I do think that the events in Somalia that we're talking about, this is 1993, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's Black Hawk Down. Most people know it from that as a title of a movie and a book. But to me, it was America at its best, which was we were here to help. There wasn't oil involved. There wasn't some other national foreign policy. It was merely to try and stabilize things and stave off starvation. So I felt good about that part of it. But, in the military, we really do foster an us versus them mentality in order to get people to do the kinds of things that are so difficult in combat, which is to kill other humans. And that's a problem, I think, and it's part of the demonization of others that is so prevalent that makes it difficult to overcome in modern society. But at the same time, I found for me that combat was also almost one of the ultimate expressions of love, which is how you care for other people so much that you will definitely make this deliberate decision to risk or sacrifice your life for people that you care about. And these are not family members. These are people that you may have only known months or in some cases years, that are, fellow comrades. And for me, that became a defining experience in my life for those couple reasons. I recognize that people are really fostering an us versus them, which I have recoiled from in my own life. But at the same time, I came to embrace other people that have become more important to me than almost anyone else in my life, and I would still sacrifice myself for today.
Yeah,
Hopefully that came. Did you, Ron? Are you getting me? I just want to make sure I'm actually not cutting out.
No, your video, at least on my end, is freezing occasionally. We do have some comments from some folks that are saying that it's your video that's freezing. So I think it is on your end, but the audio didn't drop out at all. We heard you, at least I heard you the whole time. Folks, if I'm wrong, correct me. But you bring up some really good points, and I write about that very thing in Floating in Darkness, and I make the point that it took the crucible of combat to really learn the true meaning of love and what that means, and identifying with something bigger than yourself, and tribalism has a lot of negative aspects, and you were exposed firsthand in Somalia to that those negative aspects, especially when you introduce tribal warfare. But tribalism also brings out some really good qualities that we talked about, like selfless action and selflessness and generosity and everything else. And so part of what we need to do as a species is to figure out how to be the first species in the history of life on this planet to cooperate on a planetary scale, right? To be able to define our community as the Earth, to be able to define our tribe as Earthlings. And I think once we're able to do that, then the negative aspects of tribalism will kind of dissolve into insignificance, into irrelevancy. And what will be left is all those positive aspects. And Dan, can you maybe share some of that with it from your experience in combat and where you see the positive aspects of tribalism being applied to our challenges and problems?
Well, yeah, I think one of the positives of tribe and tribalism is the resilience that it fosters in the individual. Sebastian Junger's book, Tribe, was a very important book to me in processing some of my own PTSD, or in trying to make sense of what I had experienced and what I've seen in the world in so many places. The conflict that is resident in daily life is a part of daily life for a lot of people in reality. And I think what matters is how to come to an interpretation of tribe to transcend that which might be destructive at a certain level. And I think that's in a middle ground. There's at a smaller group level, tribe is almost always positive. Family is a great tribal unit. And even small groups, small communities, which were more common previously on planet Earth because there were fewer people and they weren't as heavily concentrated in big areas. But then when you transcend that and you get into the kind of nationalism that is, authoritarian populism and things like that, where it's us versus them. And I like to use in America, Democrats versus Republicans. Democrats and Republicans piss me off because, I'm very agnostic. I'm not one or the other. I'm a very central person by philosophy, but it's the demonization of others when you get to these larger levels that become destructive. And Ron, you and I would see this the same, and I'd be interested in what people thought who are participating. That's what fosters things like mutually assured destruction and the deployment of nuclear weapons, something you're very familiar with more than I. And that's where it becomes an existential threat.
Yeah, actually, mutually assured destruction is the title of chapter 1 of Floating in Darkness.
Right.
Which it's interesting because the book is the writing in the book is an evolution itself. And so the writing changes from the beginning to the end. The words I use, the worldview that I espouse changes. And the chapter opens with me reporting to nuclear alert in West Germany during the Cold War, at the tip of the sword there. And I don't want to give too much away, but there's a certain level of insanity. In hindsight, looking back, there's a certain level of insanity in that, maybe a great deal of insanity. And so, we used the example of Somalia back in 1993 as an example of tribal warfare. We can use the United States of America right now as an example of tribal warfare too. We are in a state of tribal warfare right now. The most obvious example is storming the Capitol, not long ago, where that really translated into actual warfare, where people lost their lives. And so that polarization is the cause of this demonization, this dehumanization, this defensive reaction to any idea that is counter to what you think is true, to react immediately and forcefully with a defensive action, in some cases a violent defensive action, whether that's violence in actual violence or violence with words, is just leading us on a path towards disaster, and it's something that we need to get off of right now. I think you're frozen again.
I agree. I think and am I frozen? Can you hear me now?
I can. Yep.
Okay, good. I'm back. And I don't mean to demonize all Republicans or Democrats, because to me, it's the professional politicians by nature, either that are elected officials or make their living by fostering their position in absolute terms and demonizing the other side. It is about dialogue in this country. And for me, historically, that's what has made America, to paraphrase Reagan, the shining beacon on a hill that I think most people would agree we've lost. And, how to get back to that, I think, how to get back to some place where you can find common ground, or at least enter into dialogue to search for common ground, to remove the vitriol and the extremism of the equation. To me, that is the path forward in order to do that. And to do that, you just have to open up and reveal yourself first, I think, to other people. It's a lesson I learned in another area of my life, which was my own struggles with processing things that I have done. I've inflicted extreme violence, I've experienced extreme violence, and I've witnessed it as a third party. And what I've experienced, what I've come to conclude that is killing people, even when justified, because you're in a war and you're fighting somebody else, absolutely does nothing to advance you as a person. That's my personal belief. There is no upside for you as an individual to killing other people, regardless of the circumstances. You may have to do it, say, to defend your life if you're being attacked or assaulted by a criminal, but in the end, your act will diminish you. But the diminishment also leads to the ability to search for wisdom or understanding of that. And I think that's the key to transcending tribalism.
Yeah.
And I would encapsulate that in the statement that people have to mature or have experienced things enough to want to transcend tribalism in a negative way.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you for sharing that, because it's spot on, and it's part of the tool that's necessary to transmute those martial instincts inward. And part of our transcending this polarization is to realize that we're being manipulated. Like I said in the opening of this, there are commercially motivated and politically motivated algorithms that are basically designed to keep this polarization in place and to accelerate it, because there is gain. People are gaining from this divisiveness. And the first thing I tend to do is when I see a post or I see something, I assess how that's affecting me. Did my pulse just increase? Did my fist just clench? Did I start to get defensive? Did I start to get aggressive? If so, I've probably just been manipulated, and I need to take a step back and try and figure out what's going on here, because we see it over and over again. Families are being ripped apart because one person in the family has a different political view than another part of the family, and that means that they've been separated into their own echo chamber walled boxes, and with walls separating them, and there's no you have to get outside the box to be able to get back to those family members. So we have had a lot of comments come on. I do want to address some of these. Here's one from Keith Heitner. From the perspective of being in the States during the Gulf War, I think that's the last time our country felt truly united. That was a benefit, of all the conflicts that have happened in the last 30 or so years. Having been somebody on the inside of that conflict, it definitely felt like we had the unified support of the country behind us, and that was really a wonderful experience. And Dan, just jump in anytime you want. I'm just going to throw some more comments up.
Well, so to that observation, I think there are some other. That was I think it was Keith was the name, but Keith. And one thing I would add to that, because I agree, it was a time when the country did come together. Part of that was based also on history, the recovery from Vietnam War, but it's also a crisis, and crises bring people together. I would say another time that Americans felt, collectively, that we had to band together and we felt emotionally connected to others was Katrina, and then even Rita and Ike. These hurricanes that were quite devastating always galvanized people to transcend their smaller or maybe less beneficial tribalism. But it's always a crisis that tends to concentrate that energy in a positive way. I think what requires more sophistication and dedication by all of us, including me, is to, when the crisis recedes, to try and tap into that as an individual and remember that's what was important. Right. Otherwise, it's all just simians. Chimpanzees are incredibly tribal, and right. And they're incredibly violent, but they understand things at a certain level. I would like to think we're a little bit more mature than chimpanzees.
Well, it hasn't been demonstrated lately. So speaking of tribalism, this is from Steve. People are making money from dividing us. Fox News business model is destroying democracy for profit. We need to counter the fear-based narrative with a story of what we can do when we come together as one. So I agree with that statement, but I would also add to that statement, both ends of the political spectrum are destroying democracy for money, because both ends of the political, both fringe elements, whether you put Fox News in that category or not, but both fringe ends of the political spectrum are accelerating divisiveness for profit and manipulating us. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So to Steve's comment and to your point, what you were building on there is that he recognized that these are professional organizations whose objective, or at least business model, is to foster these things, because that's how they make money. One of the things I like to take a step back and up to a maybe more 20,000 foot view is that, recognize that when you're watching television, any television, that is a medium designed to put you into a state of passive receptivity, so you're susceptible to suggestion. That's why people pay $5 million for 30 seconds during the Super Bowl, because it works. It's okay that it works, because it works for a reason. That's just the way humans process things and connect with things, and pushing emotional buttons. Those are effective. What I would encourage anyone who's listening, and Steve, for you too, as you talk about this, is whenever you see something like that, and it's to Ron's comment, if you feel suddenly angry or emotionally even happy about something, is to ask the question, why do I feel this way? And recognize that whoever is making you feel that way has a deliberate purpose. And it's important to try and understand what that purpose is. If it aligns with you, understand why that is good, but also why that can be bad. Because if it makes you feel good because other people are less than you or not even human, that's not a positive message.
Exactly. And I do want to just
cut out there again.
Nope, you're good. You're good, Dan. But I do want to jump in for a second, and I want to share with everyone a deal that we have here for listeners right now. We're in the pre-order campaign of Flowing in Darkness. We really want to get this message out as far as we can, and so we've got this 25% promo code future. If you use that on flowingdarkness.com/order, and that the 25% is good for the next 24 hours. So jump on there if you want to pick up a copy. It's coming out May 4th, and I'm really excited about where that is going. And it's been a wonderful journey, and I want to bring everybody along with me on this journey, because most, if not all, of what we're talking about is in this book. And we are living in very divisive times. And I just want to see. This is from Penny. I believe the divisiveness
So,
is
Ron,
actually.
I would just like to dovetail onto your book for those listening. I think, for all of you, I think Ron's book is actually brilliant. It's a great insight building on what we're talking about. And my takeaway was this is what you are trying to accomplish, Ron. But for those of us who've never left Earth, I really encourage you to pick up a copy because it provides this great perspective. Personally, I feel cool just because I get to be on a podcast with Ron. So my cool credibility has gone up 30% or something. But the fact is like it helps us form these opinions because your orbital perspective, and I love the backdrop, and I really love the jacket of the book. Ron and I have talked about this before because it provides this really cool science fiction, almost harkening back to some of the great science fiction writers, Robert Heinlein and other people you may have known. But it really it projects this. What does it mean to us as a species to view ourselves from this higher elevation? And so few of us have had that experience, Ron. I think it's a brilliant part of the book.
Thank you, Dan. I really appreciate that. And we have a comment here from somebody who has a similar last name. So
it's my sister.
Yeah, I think this is your sister.
So that's a loaded question. Yep, and I think victim mentality is something to be aware of. But yeah.
Yeah. So the point Penny's making about being fear-based, divisiveness is fear-based. I think is a really, really good point because, and we've talked about this many times on the Orbital Perspective podcast. I talk about this extensively in the book. I've talked about this on and on. There are two, in my view, there are two really, really powerful methods to spur action, to motivate people towards action. One is fear, and the other one is awe and wonder. And both are very, very powerful. The difference between the two, I mean, there's a lot of differences. One is productive and one is destructive. One is positive, one is negative. But also one only works in the short term, and that's fear-based. I don't believe that fear-based is effective long-term motivator of action. I think it only motivates short-term action. And a lot of times what is good in the short term is horrible in the long term. But awe and wonder-based motivation, on the other hand, I think is good in both the short term and the long term because it opens up the mind. It opens up your ability to collaborate and cooperate with others. It allows rational conversations to occur. And so fear-based conversations are not usually rationally based. And so Dan, what do you think about that? Any comments on what Penny brought up?
I do, because I think fear has the ability, like you said, is short term, but to instantly galvanize people in a way that aligns them toward action. And that's the effectiveness of fear-based motivation. Awe and wonder are deeper, I think, although some people would argue that fear can be deeper because it might be existential. You might feel like, hey, I'm going to die. But awe and wonder is this thing that allows you to be more reflective. I'd throw a third category on there for long-term motivation, and I think that's love as a word. And it's one of the things I talk about when I talk about combat is the fact that it is these gestures of love. I even wrote a previous book on the subject. What most people think is a war story, I think is a love story of self-sacrifice. And I think that's the other area that allows us to really commit ourselves. And that can go back to tribalism. Love for family, your children or your parents are the two strongest typically, because people as a couple will concentrate their energy on those efforts and those people. And those are long-term objectives, and they're very profound, which is why when you lose them, your wife or your husband or your children or your parents, it's so profound, more so than fear. And the trick is, of course, they're not as galvanizing to instant action. And that's why we have to pay more attention to them than the fear. That's what I think, how I would sort of wrap that.
Yeah, let me pop this up from Penny again. The opposite of love is fear, and fear can be many things. I don't know that love has an opposite. And it might be worth well, I'm sure it's worth pulling on this a little bit and talking about and having a conversation, because I really think you're onto something. I really do think, love is a very, very powerful driving force. And when I say awe and wonder, what has dawned on me since you brought that up is that's part of it. I mean, that awe and wonder is an aspect of love, and
I agree.
And really it's love. And to me, when you boil what love is down to its basic essence, if you will, it's the recognition in another person of your shared existence. It's basically when you say you love somebody, whether you're doing this consciously or not, what you're saying is, I recognize myself in you. I recognize the unity. I recognize a unity in you. And that this wall, this false shadow illusion wall that separates all people between me and the person I'm expressing my love to has disappeared, or at least I've gotten a glimpse through it. To me, that's what true love is. And there's lots of things that we describe as love that aren't love at all, but true love is that recognition. And that recognition, I believe, drives you to do things like potentially sacrifice your life for somebody else, because you recognize that unity, and you recognize that unity is much bigger than you. And that unity is what needs to be protected above all else. Dan, what are your thoughts on that?
I think I agree. And you had cut out a little bit there, but I agree. I think on that same theme, I think the love connection that you have with others has a way of validating your existence as well. Can be a very real thing for you. It allows you in a positive way to know that you exist. And it goes back to something you and I have talked about in the past. One of the things I like, and it's thematic, and it's part of the core of your book, is that everything is connected. To understand that everything is connected sometimes can be this sort of remote, sort of scientific or philosophical position for people, but I don't think that's the way it really has to be. And one of the things I like to use when I give speeches, and I guess here we are, is that if you want to understand how that you are actually connected to the broader universe, and by that I mean the backdrop to our event today of space and the far distances, if you look at the stars at night and you look at a star, pick any star you like, when you are looking at that light is a direct connection from that body in space, hundreds of thousands or even millions of light years away, directly to your eye. You are connected in that instant, absolutely, by a beam that has extended from that place. Traveled millions of light years to get to your eye, but it's directly connected to it. That's how real that is. And I always find that fascinating, but I can kind of geek out on that.
Well, I mean, I think those are glimpses into that unity, but that unity exists constantly, and it's comprehensive, regardless of not if you see that light or not. It's always, I mean, that connection is always there. And on a personal level, a person to person level, that's what's missing right now, because when we get placed in these echo chamber walled boxes, when we're separated by our political affinities, our races, our religions, or whatever other artificial thing we want to put it in to separate us, what we're doing in that process is we're saying, I do not recognize that unity. I do not recognize our implicit wholeness. I don't recognize that there's something bigger than just me. I'm the most important thing right now, and everything else is subservient to my own ego, if you will. And so that is what drives that. And so going back to the manipulation, when I read something and my fists clench up and my blood pressure goes up and all that kind of stuff, and I realize, oh, I'm being manipulated. If I don't realize that, that's me in that happy to be inside this little box, and that's me consciously or unconsciously placing myself in the box, because we have control over how we respond to anything that we're exposed to. And if we're exposed to something and we retreat into our little comfortable box where we know everybody's opinion matches our opinion, then we're doing ourselves an injustice, and we're doing the world an injustice.
Yeah, I think it diminishes us. It
Right.
diminishes you as an individual, and it diminishes humans collectively. And the sad part about that, and I think the positive message that we should continue to go for, is that limits us from a species and as individuals from reaching our full potential. And I
Exactly.
believe humans should always try and reach their full potential. It's Aristotle in a nutshell, which is, to be happy. And he was the first Greek philosopher to really talk about happiness as something that's important. And I'm a very big fan of Aristotle. But to him, that happiness meant to reach your full potential on something that is worthy of your best efforts. And I think that's an important thing to make sure. Is it worthy of who you are? If you
Exactly.
really think that it's worthy of your best effort to call other people, baby killers, or want to destroy your homeland, I think you're missing. That's not full potential.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Dan. And the main tenet of the book and the subtitle of Floating in Darkness is a journey.
I'm afraid
is a journey, is a journey of evolution. And I talk. So basically, what I'm doing is I'm using the allegory of events that have happened in my life as an allegory for the evolution of society, and I equate it in the book to breath, right? And when we breathe, when we inhale, we take in, we become, we bring in from the outside to ourselves. And I equated the first inhale of evolution was the first giant leap of evolution, where the point where we actually became human, the point where we became self-aware, where we realized that we can project our conscious thought forwards or backwards billions of years, that we are distinct individuals, that we're in relation with others. That was the first giant leap of evolution, the first inhale of evolution, if you will. But you can only inhale for so long before you have to exhale. And when you exhale, you let go, you give up of yourself. And this next giant leap of evolution, which we're right in the middle of right now, is the realization that the self that you're self-reflecting on is not just an individual, but it's part of a larger cosmic journey, which is exactly what you're talking about. And people are waking up to that fact that all of this separation is just an illusion, and that there is this implicit underlying unity and wholeness that we have been denying. And seemingly that denial has been accelerating, but that denial is not going to win out in the end. We are going to realize our wholeness, our unity, and we are going to transcend above the tribal warfare that we find ourselves in at the moment. Dan, you're frozen again. So I'm gonna go to comments.
Yeah, I apologize because I only caught half of that, and I'm not sure if it's on my end. But it's funny because I was just looking at my back. I've got actually James Nestor's book Breath right behind me in my backdrop, and it's a brilliant book for those of you who are listening on part of these concepts that Ron's talking about, which is not just the necessity of breath and the mindlessness of it, because we don't think about it any day. Oxygen's not something we think about till you don't have any. And that's one of the reasons we use that in training where I came from, is it's a great stress inducer to take someone's oxygen. And if you've been in space, I'm assuming you're aware of that, the absence of it outside of your vessel all the time, as this is not someplace you can be. I digress a bit, but the fact is, I think that's a really powerful point that you made about breathing and being aware of it. And it's the reason why for meditation, so much of meditation, traditional meditation, focuses on breath. And it's a brilliant book. You should, right after you buy Ron's book, you should buy Breath. And it's right here on the back shelf somewhere. And I really recommend it for people. It transformed how I viewed breathing, and it's brilliant. So anyway, Ron, that's how I would add to that. That last point.
Yeah, and thanks to everybody who put in the comments. They're actually coming in faster than I could process. So we'll try and get to everybody. But it's interesting that you brought up meditation, because the way I understand it, the basics of meditation is basically to step outside of your thoughts, right? To realize that you're not your thoughts, that you're the awareness that realizes that you're having a thought, right? And so that's kind of what it's like to be in space, because when I was in space, I was detached from the only world I had ever known. I could look back and see the Earth from outside. So in other words, what I basically did is I stepped outside the frame of the masterpiece and was able to see it. I was part of this painting, this beautiful masterpiece that was, framed, and I got outside of the frame and I was able to look back. And, I think it's only when we're able to step outside of that, of whatever challenge, problem, situation we have, and look at it from the outside, that it's only then that a lot of things become clear. And I'm cautious when I say that, because there's no requirement to go to space to realize any of what we're talking about. And what we are talking about, though, is overcoming divisiveness. And if you can't step outside of the frame, if you can't step outside of your echo chamber walled box, you're not going to see the problem. You're part of the problem. And so that's why we need to take a break, just take a pause and try and see things from the outside. We can't do it all the time, but whenever you can, try and do that.
And it's so important to do that. And speaking on behalf of myself and everybody who's listening, Ron, we are all fascinated by the fact that space provides that perspective, and none of us, you're the only person in this conversation, unless there's another astronaut on there, who's had that perspective. And I think it is, not only does it raise this perspective to a higher level physically and literally, it is what allows us to start transcending. I think so much of the value of humanity is to look at space. We can't abandon Earth. Science fiction, it's a common theme, it's a trope even. It's like, well, Earth is destroyed and we've moved, like a diaspora. But that's not how it should be, in my personal opinion. But the fact is, I think that's what allows us to facilitate our overcoming this base level of negative tribalism and the warfare that goes along with that. To transcend warfare would truly be, in my opinion, the evolutionary step that changed humanity. And I think the space efforts and your experience in there are part of that step.
Well, that's exactly why I wrote the book. I mean, because that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book, is that we are on the cusp of that. We are at a major inflection point where this is the great transition that we're in right now, where we're all living through it. There's never been a more exciting time to be alive than right now, because that change is happening and we are all part of that change. And we, on every moment of every day, we consciously or subconsciously make the choice whether we're going to participate in that, what course correction, if you will, participate in this blossoming awareness of our true unity, or and participate in life, basically, or where are we going to obstruct it? Are we are we a unifying force, or are we a destructive and dividing force? And I am absolutely positively convinced, and I do want to close with a talk about how we see the future, but I'm absolutely convinced that the unifying force is going to win out over the divisive force, and we will look back at this time as really, really difficult growing pains that we went through, but it was the necessary price to pay to get to fulfill, to keep us on the track towards our full potential. And so with that, Dan, I wanted to ask you how you see the future, and what you see are the path that we're on right now. Is it the path that we should be on? Is there a different path? How do we get on that path? And where do you see us ending up in, let's say, the next 50 years?
Oh, that's such an easy question. I'll just be able to throw it right out there. Thanks for the softball, buddy. No, but in all seriousness, and I think in a positive way, because I am a raging optimist. I think it's true. It's how you go about those things. You have to think about them, but it's not one path only. There are false starts, and there are setbacks. All of those things are okay, because what matters is, it is the best time to have been alive as a human. There's another book back here on my shelf somewhere, Enlightenment Now, and it's really about how to understand why this is a good time to be alive. People live longer if you have access to anything beyond subsistence living. even poverty is different than what it was in the past. Poverty is a problem to be solved, but there's no solution. You'll never eliminate it 100%. But poverty today means you probably still have a cell phone and a refrigerator and maybe even a car, at least in this country, as opposed to what it was 50 years ago, which means you may not even have food. I'm not diminishing poverty. What I'm saying is these are positive evidences that we overlook to our own detriment, not recognizing that we are advancing things. So to why I think I'm positive about the future is time's our friend in this respect. The children that are our children today or grandchildren today are more accommodating, more educated, more aware than any generation of humans going all the way back to the Rift Valley at first Exodus. And in there lies our salvation, because they are more accepting and they are more tolerant. The more that spreads around the world and we do eliminate poverty so people can advance and spend time thinking about these things and having experiences in life that aren't just trying to get enough potable water that isn't laced with arsenic, that's what's going to allow us to go forward. And I think that's a continuum, and I think that's humanity's journey. So, going into this, leaving the atmosphere and going into space is just one more aspect of that. But that's why I'm positive, because I think children today are in many ways better than the generations before them, if we give them a bit more credit.
Yes, I think that is certainly true. That life, the quality of life that is provided now is better than it has been in the past. But and a lot of that is brought about by technology. But to your point, technology has not lifted people out of poverty, and there are right, many people fighting, scraping by every day, barely surviving. You brought out that this country in America, it's the poverty level is a lot higher than poverty level in the rest of the world. But I've done a lot of work in the developing world, humanitarian work. I've founded nonprofits. I've founded social enterprises. I've seen this firsthand, and there are many people, hundreds of millions, if not more, that don't know if they're going to survive tomorrow because they don't have food to eat. They don't have clean water to drink. They're living on way less than $1 a day. And we still have that very, very real destitute poverty. And what I learned through all those experiences, and now it's coming out in different publications as well, is that the root cause for that poverty is because we live in a system that keeps that status quo in place. We live in a system that has artificially set up these boundaries and barriers and walls that keep people in poverty. And they keep people in poverty because there's people that are benefiting greatly from the status quo. And we are seeing this in the divergence of wealth, and how the rich are exponentially getting richer and the poor are exponentially getting poorer. Now the middle is maybe progressing along, and that is also by design, because if you keep the middle happy, then there won't be too many waves made about the people on the bottom. All of this whole thing, what I'm trying to say is that this is all artificial. That it's not. It's not
absolutely.
It's not those poor people over there, whatever country you want to. That's us. That's part of our human family. And when I say that we are part of one human family, this is beyond the physicality of DNA. The physicality of DNA will say, if we go back far enough, every single person on the planet came from the same mother and father. So we are actually literally all related as a family, right? But there's an underlying unity that goes beyond that. That's even more important than that physical dimension. And that's the part that's missing. That's the real part. And all this other part is artificial. All these systems that are in place, all the colonial conquests that led to a lot of problems, that continues to bring problems throughout the world, are in place because the status quo is benefiting those people who are exponentially accelerating their wealth. And so that is, but again, that's artificial, and it's something that we need to address.
And I think it's this is where, for countries that are important for humanity, that are completely outside of America, China and India, they are struggling with that middle in a very real way. And, I'm not here to bash or praise on Chinese centralized government. You can talk about Hong Kong as other things, and there's repression in those things. But the fact is, there's power in the middle. And that's why governments that are authoritarian fear the middle. The Soviet Union was a great example, and it eventually imploded. Now, modern Russia has problems now with the middle in a different way, but to pay attention to those things, if you're a government or a policy person, this is back to your point, Ron. I think this is where to pay attention to that, to use that middle to help with it's truly even the word middle ground between the extremes of wealth and poverty and why they're diverging, is something that exceeds my expertise, but I think it's essential to do.
Exactly. And I want to pop up a comment from Steve. And he says, yes, poverty is a product of a system that wants and needs people to be divided into rich and poor categories. Scarcity mentality. We could live in an abundance-based world. Science can give us that, but those old socio-political systems are in the way. So I just, maybe this will bring us to a close on this episode of the Floating in Darkness live stream event series, is this idea of a scarcity mindset, because that is kind of hitting the nail on the head. And it's a fear-based mindset. So back 10 minutes ago, we talked about the difference between a fear-based mindset and an on-wonder-based mindset. And on-wonder is an abundance mindset where there's enough pieces of the pie is big enough for everybody, right? And the scarcity-based mindset is I need to take the whole pie because I don't know when the next pie might come around. So
exactly, that's fear.
Yeah, that's fear, and it's fear-based. Yes, it's fear-based. It's fear-based. It's fear-driven power grabs is what it is. It's I need to grab as much power as I can, and wealth is a way to grab power, and I need to do that because basically my actions are fear-based, and I don't understand that really if we solve these problems together, if we join together, if we set aside our differences and solve these challenges, there won't be any scarcity. And I say that with the caveat that the solutions are never only technical. We're never going to have a technical only solution. They also require us to make a change in our behavior, make a change in our mindsets, make a change in our awareness. It requires us to be more open, more transparent. It requires us to be more empathetic or emphatic, more altruistic. I mean, all of those things are requirements to make any of this work, that we have to, God, I forget who said this now. You'll help me out. All change comes from within, right? We can't change the world if we don't change ourselves first. And
absolutely. And for lack of a better person to describe it to, we'll give it to Eckhart Tolle. How's that? Okay. And but I don't think it's him, and I will fail you in that. But to Steve's comment that came on there. Well, first of all, I really like that he's got Snoopy on a typewriter, because Snoopy on a typewriter on a dark and stormy night is one of my favorite little, images from. It covers a lot of positive ground. So Steve, I really think that's cool. But his point was, socio-political challenges. And I don't see his comment now, but the gist of that, I think this is this part of the solution is politics. For as much as we all of us who aren't involved in politics, which is 99 point whatever % of all people on the planet, because most of us make our living from politics, but that's the solution, because the politics and policy and how governments implement them and how governments view things driven by their population, and that's the big middle ground, will make the change. But it's mundane, it's not exciting, and people tend to fall away from that. But to me, the mundane and the unexciting are the answers to most challenges in life. You'll find what you're looking for. If you want real meaning, it may wow you, but you're going to find that it's simple and it is every day. That's, I think, part of to me, that's where I find a lot of joy now. And I spend a lot of time thinking about this.
Exactly. That's a good point. I think that's a good point to end it because I've gone over. I apologize for that. I also apologize that we didn't get to all your comments. I will do the best I can to go into YouTube and into Facebook and answer all those comments. Dan, you're welcome to jump in there too, obviously, if you want. But I just want to say thank you so much, Dan. Thank you for all the service to our country, to our world, to everything that you're doing, to the messages you're getting out into the world, all the work you're doing. I really think you're setting a good example, and I'm really grateful for this conversation that we've had, and I'm looking forward to getting you as a guest on the Orbital Perspective podcast, and we can continue this conversation because it was a really great conversation. And thank you so much for everybody who tuned in and left your comments and questions. It was so wonderful to have you be a part of this conversation with us.
Ron, thanks for having me. To everybody, thanks for tuning in. I hope it had some value. I leave this knowing that, one, I think this was a really positive conversation, and two, I still gained some cool credibility points because I got to hang out with an astronaut again.
Well, I got to hang out with somebody who did 201 parachute jumps in 24 hours.
Yeah, it's just logistics, man. There's nothing we probably want to do about that.
You've got almost as much weightless time as I do.
Hey, listen, thanks for having me. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. And you will not go wrong in picking up Ron's book. It's a great insight, and it builds on the things we're talking about. And Ron, look forward to the next time. In the meantime, be safe out there, and cheers, everybody.
All right. Thank you so much, Dan. We'll see you. Hopefully we'll see you on the slopes.
Yeah, I'm going up now.
All right. Actually. All right. Everybody, thanks again for tuning in. I want to remind everybody that we've got this deal going on for the next 24 hours. I really want you part of this journey. I'd love to hear what you think about the messages in the book. I really think the messages in the book are messages that the world needs to hear right now. And because of that, for you guys who have tuned in and have been along on this journey, we have a 25% off code of future at floatinganddarkness.com/order. So thanks again, everybody. It really has been great. This is episode 2. We're going to have 5 episodes of this leading up to the launch date and the publication date of Floating in Darkness. And I'm just really, really happy that you're along on this journey with us. So take care, everybody.